G'day everyone, welcome back. You're here for the first time, g'day. My name's Stuart, welcome to my channel. And obviously today we're going to be talking about farmland and water. And I'm not sure if you know, but in almost all situations, in all agricultural forms of production, water is the #1 limiting factor. Even farming, sometimes even farming in the sea, water is the limiting factor. That's a topic for another conversation. Now, jumping right in, I'm going to start with the quantity because it's one of the easiest things that you can work out, one of the things you need to think about the least, and whenever you can avoid thinking, it's good because it's hard work. You know, as much as possible, my philosophy is you gather information so you don't have to think about stuff, the decision just presents itself. If you're going to be farming stock, you can research how much water you're going to need per animal per year. If you're doing a crop, dogs have come out to decide to keep me company. If you're going to be irrigating a crop, you can research how much that crop's going to need per acre. And once you've got those water rates, you just total up how much you want to produce, and there's the quantity of water you need. Does the piece of land you're considering have that water available to it, either on the property or deliverable to the property? And when I say deliverable, I'm not talking like in a truck. You know, is there a bore? Is there a pipe network? Is there a canal? You know, how's the water get to you? And it's a simple consideration. You don't have to think about it. If there's not, okay, go look at another property. Next thing though is the quality of that water. Recent job I did in Western Queensland. It's the desert, but they've got masses of water underground. It does come with a fair bit of salt in it though, and around 800,000 ppm. Now, humans can tolerate that quite well. That's perfectly fine for drinking water for humans, perfectly fine for cattle. When it comes to agricultural or horticultural crops, salt can be a much bigger issue because there's a whole stack of crops that can tolerate almost no salt. If you're going to be growing strawberries or avocados, you need excellent quality water with, you know, very, very low levels of dissolved solids in the water because they just don't tolerate it. On the other hand, tomatoes can handle quite salty water. It's not just the salt tolerance of the crop. You've also got to consider the long-term salt tolerance of the land. Because what tends to happen is that if you're irrigating water that has a reasonable amount of salt in it, it builds up over time in the land. And there's got to be some mechanism for getting that water flushed out of the soil. Now, in a high rainfall environment, even if all that rain is concentrated in one particular part of the year, it's not a problem because if it's a monsoon or it's very high winter rains, then that salt can get washed out of the soil and you're good to go the next season comes round. But I don't know what the water sound quality is like, but I think I've got a choice of either get this done or give up. It'd be nice to have a studio, piece of land, quiet. Conversely, if you're looking at a piece of land that's in a dry land environment with very little rainfall, then the water quality has to be that much better because in a dry land environment, low quality water is going to lead to a buildup of salts in the soil, and that will ruin the soil and ruin its productivity. And those considerations make quality a slightly more complicated thing to consider than just quantity. But you've also got to consider what you're producing and where it falls on the value ladder of different products. Now, if it's a very low value product that you're producing, or not necessarily a low value product, but low value relative to the inputs, then there's not much you can afford to do to treat the water to improve its quality to make it usable. You know, for example, cattle grazing. Beef is becoming a very high value product, but the amount of inputs that you need to produce that beef is quite high. You know, particularly, and if you're going to be irrigating to produce pasture, it's ridiculously high, which is why pretty much no one really does it anymore because it's just not cost effective. There's so much more valuable crops you can produce with our limited precious water that irrigating to pasture is pretty much a thing of the past. I know people still do it, but they could make a lot more money doing other things with their water than irrigating pasture. If you have a product that's higher on the value chain, like lettuce, for example, here in Australia, heads of lettuce at the moment selling for around $12 each. Ironically, because the lettuce crops have been wiped out by floods, whereas in the last 20 years they've been severely impacted by drought. But lettuce is a very high value crop, and in situations where you have pretty extensive drought, it can be still worth investing in the water and restoring that water to a reasonable quality, because the price of the lettuce will be going up as water is getting more scarce to grow it. It's a bit slightly more complicated consideration. And of course that thing then feeds into one of the other 4 essentials things, which we'll be getting to, well, the last one I've got on my list, which is the cost of water. But before I want to talk about that, sorry, one more thing about quality. If you're at the very top of the the value ladder, say with hydroponic crops, then you don't really care about the quality. You just care about the quantity and the security of getting that quantity. Because with hydroponics, you don't need much water. You're producing a very high value crop. You can afford reverse osmosis technology in both the capital cost of installing it and the operating cost of running it to produce your water. As long as the quantity of water is there, then that plays into the third factor about water, which is water security. Now, this is something that has really come home to bite a lot of farmers in the last couple of decades. Here in Australia, we've had what we call the millennial drought. Around 1997, 1998, rainfalls across huge areas of the country just started dropping. 75% of annual rainfall, 50%, 25% of annual rainfall. It's just utterly appalling. And it's arguable that some areas of the country might only just be coming out of drought now, 25 years later. And I say arguable because, well, we're not really sure whether they come out of drought yet. There's been some massive rains and some massive floods, but floods don't break droughts. A return to more normal rainfall patterns is what breaks drought. A flood dumping a huge amount of water in at once doesn't, well, it can help. It does help. Well, can cause catastrophic devastation, as we're seeing in northern New South Wales and Queensland at the moment. But it doesn't necessarily break the drought. Now, an area to the north of where I live in the Goulburn Valley, it's got a massive dam which holds a stonking amount of water. And so if you get a flood in or high rainfall event in the catchment of that dam, then it can refill it. And it can go from, and in fact it did, in 2011, went from empty, literally pretty much empty, to overflowing. And that saved the bacon of the Goulburn Valley Irrigation District. Didn't break the drought, because 2012, 13, 14, they went back into very low rainfall relative to the long-term averages. But because that massive water store is there, Lake Eildon, it adds a lot of security to all the irrigation operations that rely on it for their water. Conversely, all the farms that are upstream of that dam, their water supply not anywhere near as secure. Now, to get extra security, a lot of people turn to groundwater, because groundwater can be, depending on the aquifer, more secure, more even in its supply than surface water. But even then, it can be a problem. Now, for another area that's close to me, over that way, the Loddon Valley catchment irrigation area, it's got incredibly rich red soils, beautiful volcanic soils which have got excellent structure, excellent fertility. They're well draining, but at the same time they're very good at holding moisture in the soil, so it's available for the plants on a longer term. Brilliant farmland. And those volcanic soils are present in the ancient valleys. So what you've got a situation here is when the volcanoes blew up and the lava flowed across the land, it of course filled the valleys that were there before the volcano erupted. So what you've got is deep underground, you've got these formations of clay soils forming the line of the ancient valley, full with basalt rock and on top volcanic soil, which means that they're incredibly good stores, aquifers. All this porosity in the volcanic rock is great at storing water. Now, if your farm is located on the edge of where the ancient valley was, and you drill down your bore, and you get to the water table, you've got excellent water, excellent quantity, excellent quality. But in a drought, because these aquifers, or this style of aquifer, is regularly replenished by rainfall, if it's not raining, and it doesn't rain for a couple of years, then the water table goes down. And if you're on the edge of the valley and your bore's here, the water table goes down below where your bore can access. And there's no point drilling deeper, because you're just drilling into clay and shale and other rocks. There's no water there. Well, actually, if you do, you keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper, you'll get to water, but it won't be very good quality. Lots of salts, minerals and stuff, not very good stuff. But if your farm is over here, in the center of the valley, you can dig down right down to the bottom of that valley, and you will be the last farm, or one of the last farms, to ever run out of water. Makes your water source more secure. That, having a deeper, oh God, what a horrible, I hate puns. That was a crime against communication. You committed a pun. And that's a thing that's a common factor when it comes to assessing the water security of a farm. It's often not about the piece of land, but it's about the broader landscape it's in. The last thing to consider is the cost of that water, because it might be secure, it might have excellent quality, it might be incredibly reliable, very secure, but how much does it cost you to get it to where it needs to be? And this feeds back into the security. How secure, how steady is that price? Now in Australia, we have water markets for most of the agricultural regions, and so when those water markets were set up, the farmers that were using the land were issued water rights, but then they were given the opportunity to sell those rights or lease those rights. And that means that that there is an encouragement to be more efficient with your water use, but also so that the water gets attracted to the higher value uses. And that's why pasture doesn't get irrigated so much anymore, because it's such a low value crop. Now dairy production's got a higher value, so you do see a little bit of irrigating of some dairy lands, but again, it doesn't have, the price of the water doesn't have to go up very much before you can make more money using that water for a completely different form of production. And as you go further up the value ladder of your different products, then the more you can afford to pay for your water. And this is important because in a drought, as the water gets scarcer, then the price of that water is going to go up. And if you're leasing water, then the cost that you're going to pay for your water is going to increase. Conversely, and this is something that really caught a lot of people out, is that sometimes you might have paid for the water, but if it's not able to be delivered because it's not in the scheme, you might only get given 75% of your allocation. In fact, some farmers in the Goulburn catchment were only getting, some years 50% of their allocation, 25% of the catchment. There were some catchments where they were only getting 5% of their allocation. In fact, there was some that got none. In fact, in some cases, you had towns running out of water. And that's more of a security issue, but the thing is, it also affects the price. As when you start getting to a situation where farmers are having their allocation restricted, like how much of the water that they've bought that they're allowed to use, then the price is going to go up hugely. And so okay, there might be access to water, you could just buy more and then you'll have it, but what will you have to pay for it? The next thing is that once you have the water, and the other thing is, you've got if you're in part of an irrigation network, then you've got to pay your connection fees for being connected to that network. Now, it might be different in other parts of the world, like India. None of this applies. It's not developed. But in the more developed parts of the world, there are regulations, there are schemes, there are connection fees. It's a whole other ballgame. And so you've got to understand what those are to understand what sort of costs you might have to pay, particularly in years when things aren't going so great. But even in a normal year, let's say the water is there available to your property. How much does it cost to get it from there, the irrigation channel or the bore, to the crop? Well, if you're flood irrigating, then it's very common for the irrigation channels to be set above the laser level of the crop, of the agricultural land. So what you do is you just siphon out of the irrigation channel and the water flows across the field. Now, it's not a very efficient way of using water, but it's a very cheap way of delivering the water to the crop. Conversely, you might be using something that's a little more efficient, not very efficient, but better than flood irrigation, which is something like a center pivot irrigator. Well, the water has to be pumped to that irrigator under pressure so that the sprinkler heads will work. That has a cost, and you've got to factor that into your business plan. But what if the water's not on the same level as the crop? Now, where I grew up, I said before, it's a very sort of rolling landscape. The dams are in the gullies. The fields where the crops are grown are kind of on the tops of the hills. Now, often that's only a 15, 20 meter lift, but in some places it's more like 50, 60, 70, 80. In fact, there was one farm I did some work on. It was a 120 meter lift from the storage to the crops. That adds a lot of cost to delivering the water to the crop. If you are getting your water from underground, then again, you've got to lift that water up from below ground to get it to the surface, to then pressurize it, to then deliver it. You've got to factor that cost into your business plan. Now, of course, the ideal situation is that your water storage would be above where you need the water, but it's very rare for that to happen naturally. It's possible, but it's very rare. Now, those are the 4 aspects of water, and because water is most often, almost always, the #1 limiting factor on agricultural production, the water that's available to the property, its quality, how secure it is, and how much it will cost you should be the first thing you really consider about a piece of land. Well, if not the first thing, the most important thing. I hope all that made sense. I've jumped around a little bit. The dogs have been barking, but I'm making a decision to get this video out. I'm sorry about the production values, but I figured it was better to get this information done and out to you rather than try and do it more perfectly, because this is, I think, the 3rd time I filmed this. If there's any questions, stick them in the comments and I will hopefully be able to clarify what I've been talking about. If there's a property that you're considering and you want me to have a look at it, and I can do a little video on how I look at that particular property and assess it for its suitability for whatever you're planning to do with it and the water issues, I'm happy to do that for 1 or 2 people. But the next video I'm planning is actually dogs. The next video I'm planning is actually a piece of land that I'm trying to buy at the moment. We're trying to raise the capital at the moment, and one of the reasons that I'm trying to buy this particular land is because the water resources on it are so incredible. I've mentioned it before. There's other videos I've got where I've been talking about it, but the next video I've got coming out, I specifically want to talk about the water and how rare this property is because of the quality of water. Lots of other reasons why it's rare as well, but the water is the thing that is intrinsic to the property. The other stuff is cool, but the water, it's amazing. Anyway, stay tuned for that, and I'll catch you guys later. Get him, Luna. Get him. Ah, yes, you're cute.